Hi, I'm Nina. I'm an actor, a writer, and a call centre worker.
How did you become involved in the project?
I got a Twitter account because I heard there's a lot of opportunities on there. Started scrolling through because I'm very annoying, hate social media, but then I kind of saw like something call out for autistic actors and writers, and I had just written something, but I didn't know if it was any good or not, or like I wanted a bit of feedback on it, so I just like submitted that. And I also just thought it's a good opportunity to like know other people who are like me and also have decided to get into this industry. Yeah.
And you've just been doing your first show that you've written and
Yep.
directed.
Yeah, I co-wrote a show with a friend about a relationship, and it went really well. So
Good.
we put that on, and yeah, just
And it was
just kind
very
of here
good.
to work on some stuff, really. Like, yeah.
I went to see it, it was very good.
Thanks.
Yes. So how does it feel to work with a whole collective of autistic people?
Yeah, it feels good. It feels like validating. It is. I don't know. It feels like any other collective, but I don't have to. I don't have to put on a mask as much, so that's better.
Do you find that as an actor in theatre you do have to mask all the time to keep up with the neurotypical world?
I used to feel like that a lot more because like 5 years ago when I started auditioning and stuff, like whenever I went to like those like agent panel things or like those industry, they always make comments on like how you come across as a person, and I always came across as aloof or shy or something, and that was always spoken about like it was a negative thing. But in my head I really wasn't trying to be, because I've always tried to be sociable and nice and look at someone's forehead when it's supposed to look like I'm looking into their eyes. But I've always had this feedback when also auditioning for like courses as well, just always like, yeah, you weren't in the room. I was like, but I was in the room. No, but you weren't present. But I was there, I was present, I was listening, I've to this day I still don't know what that means. I wasn't present because I feel present, but I guess I just I don't know. Yeah.
So, when did you first discover you were neurodivergent?
When I got diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 19, but I'd always suspected I was autistic when I was a teenager, because I had a few friends that were, and I always felt like I related to them. But I never got given an assessment or anything. Whenever I would speak to people about it, they would just say, oh, we're all a little bit autistic, so I didn't really pursue anything. And then when I moved here, I felt like if I do get a diagnosis, or if I do try and do a bit of soul searching and like figure out who I am, then that will negatively impact me in the industry, because I've had so many comments about the way that I am, and I'm not hurting anyone. I haven't said any insulting, terrible things, so I don't know why it's a problem. I don't know, it feels a bit, yeah. So now I'm seeking a diagnosis. Well, I was seeking a diagnosis 3 years ago, and still I'm on a waiting list.
It is very hard, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, you just haven't had the traditional major crises or run-in with the law.
No, I'm planning a heist to rob a bank. That should be fun. Not for any money, just so that I can get arrested and then diagnosed.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Inspired. Thank you. Hello there. How did you get involved in NeuroSpace?
I believe a friend of mine.
For God's sake. Sorry. Haroon, first of all, how did you get involved with the NeuroSpace?
So I got formally diagnosed with autism back in August 2020. And since then I've been very open about having autism, but also got ADHD. And one of my friends who's a creative basically sent me the tweets that Jake Hart, who's involved in NeuroSpace, is one of the co-directors with Bethany, basically put out, saying that they were looking for neurodiverse autistic storytellers to get involved in a theatre showcase. I haven't done theatre yet, and I really have been wanting to get involved in theatre. I want to tell, I'm basically a writer and a poet, and I wanted to get involved in sort of other mediums and other art forms and tell stories, so it was a great opportunity. I reached out to Jake, messaged him on Twitter, and I think like a week later I was in a basement in the Curzon, I think in Soho in London, a great cinema that I've seen some incredible films at over the last sort of couple of decades, and it was just brilliant. It was brilliant being around other artists. It was brilliant being around sort of other neurodiverse people, particularly people who are autistic. I just felt like sort of meeting long lost family. I think that's what I always find when I connect with other artists and with other people who are neurodiverse. And if you meet with people who are neurodiverse and they're artists, then it's just like the collision of just two beautiful worlds, and it just creates this incredible Venn diagram. It's just that overlap, lovely sweet spot for me. So it's been incredible being involved so far.
Brilliant. You're very eloquent about how you feel, and it's always, I must say, it's fascinating to hear your great explanations of yourself and your life and Sharon. I like to think we've created a space off the stage where we can share with each other and find ourselves in each other, and indeed share that with the audience. Your work is rap, isn't it?
It's poetry.
Yeah.
But with heavy hip hop influences.
Right.
So, I mean, even just from the way I'm dressed, wearing a beanie hat, a puffer jacket, wearing trainers, it's probably apparent that I'm a massive hip hop fan and hip hop head, and that's just influences the way that I write as a poet. So yeah, I love poetry, but I feel like poetry's it's like a gateway drug.
Yeah.
It's like opened the portal into other forms of writing, and so I'd definitely love to start branching out into things like writing for the stage, writing for the screen. So I can see myself going forward, working more on that craft and starting to develop things for that as well. I mean, look, I absolutely love creativity.
Yeah.
I love creativity in all shapes and forms. I love it as a fan, as someone who goes and checks out other artists' work. I love it from the perspective of being a creative myself. And I think creativity is really, really fucking important.
Yeah.
I'm someone with a plethora of sort of mental health issues. Obviously, decades of undiagnosed ADHD and autism, decades of undiagnosed sort of clinical depression and anxiety, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet for me, I honestly feel the root of so much of it comes back to this incredible quote by a photographer and artist called Chase Jarvis, who's got a podcast called The Chase Jarvis Show. And he basically says that latent creativity is not benign, which basically means that if you've got unused, untapped creativity, it's actually bad for you.
Yeah.
And I think for myself, what I'm really loving about getting involved in projects like NeuroSpaces and a whole heap of other stuff that I'm involved with in sort of writing and music is, I just think that creativity is really, really good for your soul, for your emotional well-being, for your mental health. And I think particularly for people who are neurodiverse, I think our brains are we're not well-rounded people. I think we're very intensely, good at certain things. For some people that might be, you're a computer programmer, coder. I do think that neurodiverse people are very disproportionately geared towards creativity.
Hello, I'm Jake Hart, and I got into NeuroSpace Theatre by performing right here, actually. Back in, I think it was October 2021. I was performing a piece called Holding Fire. It was an autobiographical piece about my own experiences with autism and ABA therapy, something I hadn't found out about until my 20s, and then took pretty much up until then to really start reconciling and understanding how that felt within me. The theatre company's founder, Wady, happened to be in the audience one night, seemed to take the piece to heart and was interested in getting me involved in this. We'd spoken before, but schedules and my own personal development, shall we say, wasn't quite ready to put my foot forward into a company that is primarily about the neurodivergent experience expressed through theatre. I'd always been about bringing yourself to your work, especially your art, and that autistic self, in my case, was something I'd been hiding and afraid of. So I thought, what better place to sort of start out in theatre than the scariest, which is why I decided to take part in this. And now the rest is history. We are, at this time of filming, we are going to be in here in about a month or so's time. We will be doing a showcase of lots of different neurodivergent talents, plays, poetry, possibly some music, but I don't know where we stand on that at the time of recording. Always with that neurodivergent side sort of intermingled with your life and sort of those fundamental things that theatre's really good at talking about death, about heartbreak, about loss, about all the things that we go through in life, only through a slightly different lens that really isn't seen enough. I suppose the ideal thing that I kind of want from this is for someone to either see themselves and their own neurodivergency in a way that they hadn't been able to touch before, or maybe even see themselves within a neurodivergent person despite not being neurodivergent at all themselves. And that's kind of the true empathy and magic of this.
As an autistic person, how do you feel about going on stage and telling the truth as much as you can that you'd normally hide behind social skills?
No. So when I did my Holding Fire piece, I would tell my director it's a little bit like skydiving. There is that euphoria and that relief and that adrenaline while you're flying through it in the moment, but there's always that bit just while you're on the edge of the plane of just dread and fear and every defense in you going, this is a terrible idea, you are going to die. And I don't really know where that voice comes from, but I think doing things like that and coming out on the other side of it, not only okay, but kind of better for it, sort of tells me I think it should be a life ambition to take on that voice, to fight that voice and not let it hold you back.
Mm. So you talked to me before about when you told people what you were and then you had a tremendous shock experience from that. Being on stage telling people you're autistic, neurodivergent,
yeah.
And then you came off and it really affected you. Can you tell us about that?
So I wasn't told about my own autism even while I was being treated for it and diagnosed for it. It was all sort of, I thought it was personal tutoring. You know, I wasn't so good at maths, that sort of thing. So actually seeing myself in that way and not in that sort of big story I've been telling myself was a big culture shock enough. And I think my family was a little bit afraid of what an autistic person looks like, and I think they were trying to keep me a little away from it, which sort of bled over onto me. So to actually expose myself in that way is very vulnerable, scary. I get imposter syndrome with my own diagnosis, I think, from it. But then there's this wonderful relief and this sort of thing in my gut going, oh, this is true. And in a weird way, despite it being such an artificial thing, is that it actually feels more true when you say it out here, because there's no expectation from the other person, there's no real judgment. They don't know who I am. They don't care. There's no I need to please you. There is no I need to be something to fit into your little bubble or perception of Jake. It can just be. And that's something I hadn't felt in my life up until that point, which is why I think that piece has been really quite pivotal in my own career and probably my own life.
And this is the thing, the idea of your art feeding your own growth.
I agree with that. And I really encourage it in other people. You don't really see it enough. Like for actors, for instance, I think a lot of them get into it to actually try and get away from themselves. There's an amazing number of neurodivergent people, definitely dyslexics for some reason. Loads of dyslexics. I work at a drama school, don't know why that is. And I'm sure people on the autistic spectrum, it invites all the people who had to hide. And I don't think they always realise that that's why they're there, and that's where the excitement's coming from. It's that idea of being accepted, which they seem to think is, well, if I pretend to be the right person, then I'll be loved, when really it's settling into the person you actually are and allowing yourself to fall for them, which is the hardest person to love, in my opinion. And I think for a group of people who are so often shunned and ignored, I think the neurodivergent people need to hear that more. And I think they need to settle within themselves and realise that they are worth caring for and that they matter. And if we can pull that off from here, even to I say 50 people, I don't know if we'll fill all the seats, then I think that will be worth it.
Thank you. My name is Paul Wady, and I didn't know I was autistic until December 2004 when I got diagnosed in a 4-hour session. And this meant I had the answer to a question I didn't know how to ask. And by then I'd developed quite a skill set in the arts, acting, writing, performing, even attempting to make music. And as soon as I found out what I was and I was able to align myself with my own reality in a way I never had been able to before, I obviously wanted to express it. And the reason I wanted to express it was to make sense of the whole thing and to share knowledge and hopefully as a Buddhist just support other people. And so it took a while to get it together. It was 2004 I was diagnosed, but it was 2015 I did the first solo show, called Gorilla Aspies, named after the book I put out that year. The Neurotypical Society Infiltration Manual, teaching you how to bully, seduce, manipulate, and coerce, in other words, be normal. by standards of society, or my standards anyway. And I did the solo show for 5 years, and then was interrupted by COVID, so we're getting back to it this year. But in 2017, I was on the first Autism Arts Festival they had in the University of Kent, and I met 2 women there who are actors, writers, performers. One was a dramaturg. Well, the other one, Sarah, was everything. Literally, has done everything: acting, writing, performing, stage management, sound, light, singer, comedian, everything, director. And the other one, Hannah, was a dramaturg and an actor. And I'd already known Alan English for a number of years, since I got diagnosed actually, in social groups in London. So we all got together and performed Stealth Aspies, the name meaning when you've got autistic people hiding the fact they're autistic, which I think is where autism comes from. In families, people don't look so like what they are, we're all in the closet. The neurocloset. Concepts like neurocloset and stealth autistics. Aspies coming from the name Hans Asperger's. Fast forward to today, 2022, the other members of the group went on to do other things. And I'm very unusual. I'm a very, very resilient person who is somehow able to keep healing every day, which is really my big secret. So I wanted to get the project back together, and I knew Jake because I'd asked him to be in it in 2019, and then we had the great 2-year hiatus, during which time you get a lot of time to think and see yourself and change and grow up. And then it was over, and got in touch with Jake. Actually went to see you. Jake is here off camera. Say hello, Jake.
Hello, Jake.
Very good. In performing on this very stage, his 15-minute piece about his life as an autistic with ABA, and Jake explained it was because of a conversation we had in 2019, and I mentioned ABA, this brainwashing, and it really affected him. 2 years later, he wrote a whole piece, and he'd come to see himself more clearly, his life more clearly, and this had raised his consciousness and his awareness of what had happened to him. And I was very touched. I thought, my God, I've achieved something for somebody. You know, that's what I'm always trying to achieve with all this work, to make sense of everything and to support other autistics, with my 2 main goals of what I've always done with all my writing and performing. And so we agreed to work together, and he put out a call on the all-powerful, all-seeing Twitter platform. And next thing you know, we had about 22 people involved. We decided to abandon the name Hans Asperger's because there's been a lot about him colluding with the Nazi Party and being part of Action T4. The sub-Holocaust the Nazis used to audition people for the main Holocaust that killed up to 250,000, so 170,000 men, women and children who were technically disabled. A lot of them are clearly autistic, you can see from the evidence left behind. Prototype gas chambers, horrible things like that. It's for your own good, son. I know how it started. There was a family who had a severely mentally, physically disabled child. There's a doctor and his wife, and they wrote off to Adolf Hitler saying, look, our child is completely destroyed by, he was autistic, neurodivergent. Can we kill him, please? And Hitler gave them permission, so I think they starved him to death, because that's how it was in Germany. My dear Führer, we have a severely disabled child. Could we have your permission to kill him? Now, I don't know about you, but I think there's something wrong with what was then the most civilized and erudite culture on the planet in the 1930s, having people like doctors and their wives doing things like that to their children. And one of the many reasons we're performing neurodivergent theatre is to make that point and to say, look, this business about autistics signing do not resuscitate notices during the pandemic. That went on, that was covered. Severely disabled people in general, autistic or not, neurodivergent or not, on the spectrum or not, neurodiverse or not, whatever name you want to call it, ADHD, OCD, oh look at Paul Wady, he's getting all the terms wrong. That's another thing. There's all these frames of reference about being what we are, which I think is a very strong personality and character type. No one seems to want to say that. And I'm very suspicious of all these different frames of reference because I think just a fraction of something far bigger. And I thought, well, this is all wrong. There are people who don't want to die, who are severely disabled, and I think this should all be reflected on stage. So he said there's an awful lot to talk about something that many clinicians and academics and people in society think is just some disorder of the brain. Like you're a person and you've got ADHD, you're a person and you've got the characteristics of autism. And there's no depth of culture There is, here it is, here we will be, showing that it's how can a disorder and disability be the basis of a long-term, stable, loving relationship between people? How can it be the basis of my marriage with my autistic wife? How can parents and children relate on the basis of being autistic and it's positive and progressive? Surely everything should fall to pieces. If you've got a disorder, it disorders the brain. If you've got a disability, it stops you being able and functional, but that's not the case. How can a disorder give you abilities with science and maths and systematic thinking and attention to detail? Getting a bit confused here. The brain doesn't work properly. It doesn't work better than most people's. My sister-in-law at one point was doing a physics degree in Cambridge University. She said the class was virtually all male, and clearly most of them, if not all of them, were on the autistic spectrum, even the lecturers. I mean, that doesn't quite make sense to me. Surely if they've got this disorder and disability, you can't even get close. The funniest thing is on social media, we had a whole army of guys like that in 2019, trying desperately to make out that the only true autism is severe disability, and anyone who says that it's not and tries to be positive about their autistic nature is destroying life for the severely disabled, taking away support, taking away understanding. I have actually challenged such people publicly to prove that happens in the real world, and I'm still waiting to hear. But I thought, hang on, aren't you people, you autistics, saying this? A fine example of the very so-called neurodiversity movement you're standing against. And so there you have schisms in the greater community, you have paradoxes, and all this was going on. About what? Disorder of the brain. Exactly, that's why we've had stealth Aspies. So we changed the name to something more appropriate. NeuroSpace Collective. Now, did you notice what just happened then? Because my memory's a bit dicky. Because A, I'm very ADHD, and B, because there's something that's actually physical about my brain we discovered a few years ago, in 2001. When I was in Bart's Hospital psychiatric unit and told there was absolutely nothing wrong with me, of any kind. I mean, I was heavily meditating in the Buddhist movement. No drink, no drugs. I'm nearly 60, look at me. And they said, look, there's nothing wrong with you. It was only 3 years later we got a formal diagnosis for autism, which is another point about being neurodivergent, simply being your nature, neither good nor bad. But what people make of it in the future, that's the thing. Autistics are always going on about my ADHD stops you living a normal life. Oh, I'm so depressed because I'm so OCD, I can't help myself. We've got so much anxiety being autistic. I think anxiety is about the only mental condition I'd allow around the condition. I think everything else people come out with is them. So already I have become very controversial in this film, and I've upset a lot of people with what I'm saying. That's the point of the NeuroDivergents Collective. The information's there in my head, but I can't quite get it out. So I've just had an awful lot to cope with making this film. And I couldn't remember NeuroDivergent Collective, even though I was part of the team that made up the concept. So now I'd like to hand it over to my good friend Jake to ask me some questions.
Okay, so we've rebranded to sort of NeuroDivergent Collective. One phrase we use is the NeuroSpace, which is the name of this showcase and how we promote ourselves. So to you, what does the NeuroSpace mean?
It means a collective of people who are all relating on the basis of being autistic as a team and a community, and are showing the audience that you can have positive, stable, long-term, creative relationships that work, and also creating a space in which people can find themselves. So that's why I wanted to do the interviews in the Barron's Court Theatre space, so people in the audience can see themselves in a way they never thought they'd see themselves. We go on about ordinary lives rather than disability. The original Stealth Aspie show was built out of stories gleaned from survey responses. So you had doctors, parents, mothers, transgender people, gender neutral people, LGBTI. We had people who didn't fit into any categories as far as they could relate to them. And we wanted them to find themselves, and people did. There was a story of a grown woman crying, weeping at the back of one of our shows in Edinburgh because she never thought she'd find herself in one of our shows. You're trying to get that effect. We've had a lot of good feedback on the first 3 years. And that's really what we're trying to get at, is to create a space so people come down here, low lighting, see themselves, they can hang out at the interval and talk to us, and see the rest of the show, and then afterwards hang around for half an hour having a drink or whatever, and just talking to us in a low arousal space away from the pub. So we're trying to create what we call the autistic space, which is definitely a reality.
What impact do you hope to have on neurotypical audience members?
We're trying to show them what it's like to be in an environment where you can feel autistic people relating to each other, as well as the usual thing of understanding, which everyone wants to do. We want to empathise and understand. Yeah, we don't empathise and relate neurotypicals. We have to do it in theory and rationalise, because it's not our basic nature. The analogies of being gay, being autistic, are legendary to all members of our community who've gone into this. Those metaphors, analogies, they're completely taken for granted. That's what we're trying to do, really. We're trying to create a space that autistics are at home in, and neurotypicals can come to respect us and understand us in as a race and a kind in that respect.
And I was right about this massive thing, so what else do I need to start listening to myself? But that's a huge shift to make.
Yeah, huge confidence.
Yeah.
boost, I can imagine.
100%, yeah. Because you get told no, you can't get over the hurdle of telling someone and going, no, you're not.
Yeah, and it's so interesting as well when you start learning about, I mean, there are symptoms everyone knows about autism where, like, maybe you're socially awkward, maybe like you're, dysfunctional in terms of your executive functioning, but there's also bits and pieces which you didn't even realize unless you've been autistic. So, for instance, because of like audible, like essentially it's auditory processing. It can happen where you're listening to music and then you hear a sound that doesn't actually happen. So, for instance, I hear my dad calling me while I'm in London, and he's in Manchester. But that just my brain translates that as like, oh, your dad's calling you. So it's like, and when I was telling this to a friend who's autistic, they're like, oh my god, I didn't realize that was a thing. But it's not very, and it's just these like little things that you expect everyone else to experience autistic or not, and then when you realize it's actually the autism, you're like, okay, that is quite cool.
There's an amazing colloquial term for that called exploding head syndrome. Because I get the same thing as I'm falling asleep, and I'll hear like a bell ringing, or I'll hear something really specific like my name being called, or the doorbell going, or like I remember once I heard someone flick a pack of cards like right next to my ear, and it's your brain trying to fill the gap where sound should be.
Wow.
Or struggling to process sound that's coming in.
Yeah.
And not quite doing it properly. And that's kind of be what happens with tinnitus sometimes as well. And yeah, I thought I was like, oh my god, I'm hearing things. And I am, but not in a scary way.
Second guessing everything I hear now.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. I like this discussion thing. So yeah, just to answer your question, we're going to go from start up until What's Your Family Like? Because for me, that's one of the sort of first major events. Cause we're digging now. Oh, okay. I think things to keep in mind